Most men think words are what make a woman remember you. They think that if they say the right things, send the right texts, deliver the perfect lines, she'll stay up at night thinking of them. But that's not how memory works in the feminine psyche. It isn't what you say that haunts her. It's what you don't. Have you ever wondered why she dreams of the man who never texted back? Why the man who never gave her closure still shows up in her thoughts like a storm she can't predict? It's not because he was cruel. It's because he was silent. And that silence spoke to something ancient, something buried beneath ego and logic, something spiritual. When a man withdraws into silence, with intention, with dignity, with stillness, he creates a psychic disturbance that she cannot resolve. That's why at 2 a.m., when the noise dies down and the masks fall away, she feels the pull. Not to the man who chased her, not to the one who explained everything, but to the one who left room for her imagination to fill the gap. The feminine mind is wired for rhythm, connection, completion. It wants to know. It wants to solve. It wants to feel the resolution. But the masculine, when grounded in spiritual sovereignty, denies her that closure, not out of punishment, but out of truth. Because he has already resolved himself, and the mystery of that resolution becomes a vortex in her mind. She wonders where you are. She wonders if you think of her. She wonders what it meant. But more than anything, she wonders why you didn't need to say goodbye. And that why echoes in her body, in her dreams. It becomes a soft ache, a loop. And the more she tries to resolve it, the more it grows, because it was never about answers. It was about energy. And your silence carried the weight of a man who does not explain his worth. You didn't need her understanding to validate your departure. You didn't write a final speech. You didn't break down into performance. You simply left. Or more precisely, you returned to yourself. And that return is what she feels. At 2 a.m., it's not your body she misses. It's your discipline, your detachment, your restraint. Because women, on the deepest level, are drawn not to dominance, but to mastery. And mastery lives in a man who can sit in silence without shaking. This is not about manipulation. This is not about disappearing to create pain. That is the path of the wounded boy. But a man who chooses silence from a place of strength becomes an enigma, and enigma is the birthplace of longing. The world tells men to express more, share more, be more available. But the archetypal masculine, the mythic man, the man forged in the fires of shadowwork and self-possession, withholds not to harm but to conserve. And when that man is no longer in her life, she doesn't simply miss him. She is changed by him. Because she never touched the bottom of him. She never reached the end of his mystery. And in the feminine psyche, that's unbearable. The ego resists it. The heart mourns it. But the soul is awakened by it. That's why she dreams of you. Not because you performed, but because you disappeared with grace. You became the absence that had presence, the stillness that had voice, the shadow that taught her more than any light ever could. In the darkness of night, when the illusions dissolve, your silence becomes scripture. She reads it like a sacred text, line by invisible line, wondering if she misunderstood you. Wondering if she ever truly knew you, wondering what it was inside you that made you so calm, so contained, so gone. And that is the true power of silence, not as retreat, but as revelation. It reveals you to her in a way your presence never could. It forces her to feel you in her own voice, to imagine you in her own mind. And that imagined version of you, that's the most intimate place she can hold you. You didn't take anything from her. You gave her something, a story without an ending. And it is in that unfinished story that you live on, not as a villain, not even as a lover, but as a riddle. And riddles don't die. They repeat, especially at 2 a.m.
There is something deeply unsettling to the feminine soul about a man she cannot fully decode. The man who does not overshare, who does not spill himself out in search of sympathy or praise, becomes less of a person in her mind and more of a presence that lingers, a shadow she cannot chase away. You see, when a man goes silent, the world calls him cold. But the wise understand that silence is not coldness, it is containment. It is the discipline of a man who has stepped beyond the emotional battlefield and chosen stillness over chaos. He is not avoiding conflict. He has simply grown tired of dancing in rooms where his depth was only ever meant to be decoration. And that depth, when it disappears, leaves a wound in the feminine consciousness, not because she depended on it, but because she didn't understand it. It wasn't something she could hold or label or fix. It wasn't reactive. It didn't perform. It simply was. And now that it is gone, it echoes through her like a bell rung once in a cathedral and never struck again. At 2 a.m., when she lays in silence, that echo is all she hears. She will scroll through old messages, not for answers, but for signs. She will stare at photos, not to remember your face, but to feel your energy again. And when none of it satisfies, when all of it feels empty, she'll begin to realize something painful and profound. She never truly knew you. Not because you were hiding, but because you were whole. The man who walks in wholeness doesn't feel the need to be dissected, explained, or consumed. He doesn't crack himself open for approval. He doesn't hand out access to his soul like favors at a party. He reserves himself. And that reservation, like a book written in a language she can't translate, torments her. It's not that you abandoned her. It's that you never let her own you in the first place. And now that you've gone quiet, she realizes how little of you she actually held. She may try to fill the gap with noise, new conversations, rebound affection, flattery from weaker men, but it won't touch the wound your silence left behind. Because nothing haunts a woman more than the man who made her feel something profound and then disappeared without needing to be seen. And this is where the deep psychology begins to unfold. The masculine, when it matures, realizes that it is not his job to be understood by everyone, especially not by those who only hear with their ego. His job is not to explain his path or justify his depth or perform his love in a way that looks like submission. His job is to walk with the truth, even if it means walking alone. This kind of man frightens women, not because he is dangerous, but because he is free. And freedom to the feminine that craves security can be terrifying. She might not know how to say it, but she feels it. The moment you went quiet, the moment you told your energy inward, she felt the axis of her emotional world shift. Not dramatically, not violently, but unmistakably. The way the temperature drops just before a storm, the way a room grows quiet before someone important speaks. Except you didn't speak. You just left the space. And that leaving became your presence. In the realm of depth psychology, Jung would tell us this is the animus being awakened. You have become a psychic figure in her mind, one who embodies something more than just a former lover. You've become the part of her that wants to be initiated, challenged, exposed, undone. You were not just a man, you were a mirror. And when mirrors disappear, they leave the viewer naked. This is the unbearable intimacy of masculine silence. It does not chase, it does not explain. It allows the feminine to feel herself, perhaps for the first time, without the softening comfort of your validation.
And at 2 a.m., when her distractions sleep and her walls fall and her breath slows, she meets the version of you that never needed to be there to still be there. She is not dreaming of your voice. She is dreaming of your absence. And the dream is a question that never gets answered, a door that never opens again. You didn't take her peace. You forced her to find it without you.
When a man withdraws into silence, the modern world calls it avoidance. But in the architecture of archetypes, that silence is initiation. It is the moment the masculine steps back, not to disappear, but to purify, to reclaim the fragments of himself scattered by giving too much, too quickly, to those who never saw his soul as sacred. You see, most men give away their silence cheaply. They fill every space with justification, confession, apology. But the man she dreams of at 2 a.m. is the one who did none of that. He didn't leave in chaos. He didn't vanish to provoke her. He simply let the door close behind him and didn't return to explain why. That kind of man becomes a myth. And myths, unlike men, don't die. They live in the subconscious, buried under reason, rising in moments when the heart is too tired to pretend. She dreams of you because her ego could not contain you, and her soul recognizes you. Not as something lost, but as something unfinished. You didn't give her closure. You gave her initiation. There is a deep spiritual law in masculine silence. It says, I will not be less just to be loved. I will not become soft just to be touched. I will not shrink just to be accepted. And when a man embodies that law, not as armor, but as inner knowing, he becomes unforgettable. Because every woman is waiting, consciously or not, to meet a man who will not collapse into her approval. A man who stands so fully in himself that her emotions can crash against him like waves, and still, he will not drown. That man is not trying to be remembered, but he will be, precisely because he did not beg to be. At 2 a.m., she doesn't miss your warmth. She misses your gravity. She doesn't crave your attention. She craves your absence of need. She doesn't ache for your voice. She aches for the peace you carried when you said nothing at all. And that peace, your silence, became louder than any declaration ever could. Because it wasn't performative. It was earned. Earned through solitude, through pain, through the long nights you spent becoming the kind of man who could walk away not in anger, but in truth. That is the difference between the boy and the man. The boy storms out to be followed. The man walks away to remain whole. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't slam the door. You didn't leave behind shattered glass or torn pages. You left behind silence. And in that silence, she now hears everything. The words you never said. The emotion you never over-explained. The detachment you wore like armor but forged from your own fire. And it terrifies her. Not because it was cruel, but because it was complete. In that stillness, you revealed a terrifying truth that you didn't need her love to feel worthy of yourself. That you were not half, hoping for her to be the other part. That you were already whole and always had been. And this truth makes her restless, not because she lost you, but because she cannot replace you. No amount of surface affection, no new man's attention, no dopamine from digital adoration will erase the felt sense of a man who moved through her life with sacred discipline. A man who chose not to speak, not to win, but to remain untamed. It is your unavailability that makes her pulse. Your restraint that echoes in her body. Your absence that reveals the hollow shape of everything she tried to substitute you with. Because once a woman has touched the field of a man who does not require her understanding to validate his existence,
She can never again be satisfied by men who perform for approval. You didn't need her to understand your silence, and that's why she can't forget it. At 2 a.m., in that lonely silence where even her own voice seems too loud, she feels you again, not as a memory, but as a question that doesn't need an answer.
The most potent truths in life are not shouted. They're whispered through absence. The same way an unfinished symphony stays with you longer than a song played to completion, your silence remains embedded in her, not because it was loud, but because it never ended. At 2 a.m., she doesn't remember your laughter. She remembers your stillness. She remembers how your eyes held oceans, but your mouth offered no map. She remembers the way you sat with your discomfort rather than fleeing it into her arms. That kind of memory doesn't fade. It forms. It shapes how she sees men, how she defines mystery, how she confronts herself. Your silence rewrote her script. And that's the deepest terror of the sovereign man. He does not give her a narrative to control. He does not let her resolve him into a character in her story. He remains unwritten, and there is no greater emotional weight than the man she cannot finish writing. Women are intuitive. They know when a man is withholding because he's afraid, but they also know when a man is silent because he's free. And your silence, if rooted in spiritual alignment and self-respect, is not a void. It is a sacred boundary. It is the line where you stopped compromising who you are just to soothe what she feels. She dreams of you not because of what you gave her, but because of what you never needed from her. Most men seek emotional refuge in women. They collapse into the feminine, not as complement, but as escape. And women feel it. They feel the hidden agenda, the emotional neediness cloaked in compliments and praise. But the man who comes to her whole, who stands beside her, but not on her, who walks away without guilt or resentment, that man reorients her soul. She may not know how to articulate it, but your silence activated a crisis within her. The absence of possession. And in that absence, her psyche begins the work she once hoped you would do for her. To soothe, to fill, to complete. You left, and now she must confront the parts of herself that were dependent on your presence to feel secure. This is why your silence haunts her, not as punishment, but as transformation. You didn't just leave, you returned to your path, your purpose, your solitude. You became the man no one could distract from his becoming. And in a world where men are trained to entertain, to perform, to apologize for their strength, your quiet defiance becomes unforgettable. Not because it was flamboyant, but because it was true. At 2 a.m., the feminine soul seeks completion, but you were never meant to be her completion. You were meant to be her reflection. And now that you're gone, she must look at herself more clearly than ever before. She may reach out. She may try to provoke a response. But the power is not in what you say. It's in what you continue not to say. Because once you speak again, if you do, it must not be to resolve her pain. It must be because your truth requires voice. Not your validation, not your longing, your truth. Until then, you remain the unsolved prayer, the sacred disruption, the echo of a man who loved without dependence and left without weakness. And that echo grows louder in the stillness of night. Not because you abandoned her, but because you chose you. Your silence is the music that plays behind her thoughts. It is the scent that lingers in rooms you never entered. It is the shape of peace she cannot recreate, no matter who holds her now. This is the spiritual paradox.
When you detach from her, you become part of her inner world. Not as a man she conquered, but as a presence she never could. And some part of her knows you will not return to prove a point. You will only return if your soul feels called. And that is why she dreams of you.
There is a moment, deep in the night, when the world goes still enough for truth to rise. No distractions, no affirmations, just the sound of her breath and the weight of what was never said. And in that breath, in that stillness, your presence returns. Not as a man she can hold, but as a lesson she cannot unlearn. This is the apex of masculine power. To leave not as punishment, but as prophecy. To withdraw not with bitterness, but with grace. And to become, in that very act, the voice inside her that speaks without speaking. She sees your face in silence, not because you haunt her like a ghost, but because you left as a man, untamed, unresolved, unbroken. This is what most men will never realize. Words may win battles, but silence wins memory. The man who argues, explains, and bleeds for attention may win her attention in the moment, but the man who says nothing, who simply bows out with composure, etches himself into her soul. Why? Because he represents the one thing the feminine cannot possess: complete masculine sovereignty. The inner stillness of a man who is no longer moved by approval or fear. A man who has transcended the need to be understood. And that, more than any love note or romantic gesture, is what makes her ache at 2 a.m. Because you never gave her an ending. And in the psyche, what remains unfinished becomes eternal. She may move on. She may fill her life with noise, with laughter, with other hands, other voices. But your absence will always carry more weight than their presence. Not because of who you were, but because of who you refused to become. Predictable, available, explained. You were the man who vanished without a word, not to disappear but to transform. And in your transformation, you forced hers. You became the hidden compass of her emotional growth, the unanswerable question that led her back to herself. So when she lies awake watching the ceiling as the world sleeps, it's not your name that stirs in her chest. It's not your body she aches for. It's the man she could never claim. That man lives in the shadows of her memory. He moves through her dreams like a wind through trees, ungraspable, real, sacred. He is not loud, he is not cruel, he is not broken. He is whole, and he is gone. But what he left behind will never leave her. Because when you are silent for the right reasons, not to hurt, not to hide, but to heal, you become unforgettable. You become the storm she never saw coming, and the stillness she could never silence. You become the space between the words, the one man who didn't need her to know him to be known. And that man, she dreams of him, not just at 2 a.m., but forever. The man who knows his worth doesn't chase, he chooses. If this spoke to something buried inside you, it's because silence is no longer just quiet, it's currency. In a world obsessed with noise and validation, the man who walks in stillness becomes legend. She dreams of you not because you chased, but because you didn't. Not because you begged to be remembered, but because you vanished with dignity. And that kind of man isn't forgotten. He's felt, long after he's gone. If you're becoming that man, you're not alone. Subscribe for more videos that honor the masculine path of sovereignty, restraint, and deep psychological truth. Stay disciplined. Stay detached.
stay mythic.